Welcome back to Real Crime Stories. It was Christmas Eve in Carnation, Washington. Inside the Anderson family home, warmth lingered in the air, scented with pine and surrounded by wrapping paper scattered across the table. Outside, the winter sky dimmed over the quiet rural property, hidden behind a locked gate. By nightfall, everything had changed. The Christmas tree still stood, its lights glowing softly, but the living room told a far darker story. The phone line had gone dead. Footsteps had fallen silent. In those final moments, the fate of 3 generations was sealed before anyone could call for help. What unfolded that night would shock a small community and expose a chain of events fueled by resentment, betrayal, and something far more sinister. At the center of it all were Wayne and Judy Anderson. Wayne, 60, was a respected Boeing engineer who had built not only a successful career, but also a 31-year marriage with his wife, Judy. Judy, 61, worked for the United States Postal Service and was well known in the close-knit town of Carnation. Together, they raised 3 children, Mary, Scott, and Michelle. Their eldest daughter, Mary, lived quietly in North Bend. Their middle child, 32-year-old Scott Anderson, was married to 31-year-old Erica Mantle Anderson. The couple lived in Black Diamond, where Scott worked long hours in construction, while Erica stayed home to care for their 2 young children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. The youngest of the Anderson children, 29-year-old Michelle Kristen Anderson, stood apart from the rest of the family. She lived with her boyfriend, 29-year-old Joseph Thomas McEnroe, in Fall City. The two had met in an online fantasy fiction chat room and quickly formed a bond that led them to move in together in 2004. Renting a mobile home, Michelle listed her job as a night security guard for Nintendo, while Joseph reported working at Target. Neighbors described the couple as withdrawn and unsettling. They avoided eye contact and reacted aggressively to minor issues, whether a misplaced car or a wandering pet. Michelle often referred to herself as the black sheep of the family, claiming her relationship with her parents was volatile. She told others her father had been abusive and her mother cold and unkind. Judy, however, worried deeply about Michelle's choices and regularly confided her concerns to a close friend. Despite the strain, she continued to visit monthly, bringing food and necessities. Though Michelle insisted she never wanted to live on her parents' property, by 2007 she and Joseph had moved into a trailer on Wayne and Judy's land, rent-free. To outsiders, the tension remained largely invisible. That Christmas Eve, Wayne and Judy were preparing to host the family gathering. Scott, Erica, and the children were expected later that evening. But before the celebration could begin, Michelle and Joseph, already on the property, entered the main house around 4 p.m. One carried a revolver, the other carried a handgun. Judy was wrapping presents in a back room when Joseph distracted her. At the same time, Michelle confronted her father. She attempted to shoot him, but the gun failed. Whether it misfired or missed its mark remains unclear. Joseph stepped forward, raised his weapon, and fired a fatal shot into Wayne's head. Michelle and Joseph then turned on Judy, shooting her 3 times. Together, they dragged both bodies to a shed behind the house, attempting to conceal what they had done by covering the blood with towels and rugs. About an hour later, Scott, Erica, and their children arrived, unaware of the violence that had already taken place. They entered the living room and sat down on the couch. Moments later, Michelle opened fire on her brother. Multiple rounds struck Scott, killing him where he sat. Erica was next. Wounded but still conscious, she managed to grab the cordless phone. At 5:13 p.m., despite being shot 3 times, she dialed 911 as her children stood just feet away. Before help could arrive, Joseph ripped the phone from her hands, tore out the batteries, and hurled it against the wall, cutting the call off mid-sentence. Erica begged for her life, but Joseph raised his gun and fired a single fatal shot to her head. She collapsed instantly. Joseph then turned toward the children. 5-year-old Olivia was shot first and died immediately. Moments later, 3-year-old Nathan picked up the phone batteries from the floor and, in an innocent gesture, reached out to hand them back. Joseph aimed the gun and fired. Nathan was still pressed against his mother's chest when he was killed. The brief 911 call Erica had placed triggered a response from local deputies. At 5:45 p.m., officers arrived at the Anderson property. Michelle had already locked the gate at the end of the long driveway, preventing vehicle access. Without entering the property or checking on anyone inside, the officers turned away, unaware of the massacre that had just occurred. 2 days later, on December 26, 2007, Judy Anderson failed to report for work at the Carnation post office. Concerned, her longtime friend and co-worker Linda tried calling the house, but no one answered. She drove to the property and found the gate locked. Unlike the responding deputies who had arrived days earlier, Linda walked around it and approached the house. The front door was closed. She knocked and called out Judy's name, receiving no reply. When she tried the door, it opened. Inside, Linda called again, but the house remained silent. Looking down, she saw a man lying motionless on the floor. At first, she believed he might be unconscious, but as she stepped closer, she saw he had been shot in the head. As her eyes adjusted, she noticed more bodies nearby. Overcome, Linda called 911, reporting multiple deaths, including her best friend. By 9:30 a.m., King County Sheriff's deputies arrived. Inside the home, they discovered the bodies of Scott Anderson, his wife Erica, and their 2 children. Nathan remained pressed against his mother's chest, while Olivia lay beneath her. All 4 had been executed with gunshots to the head. A search of the property led investigators to a shed behind the house, where they discovered 2 more victims, Wayne and Judy Anderson. Like the others, both had been shot. Several hours later, around 11 a.m., Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe arrived at the crime scene. Detectives immediately noticed their behavior. Michelle identified herself as Wayne and Judy's daughter and explained that she lived in a trailer on the property. Neither she nor Joseph asked what had happened, why the area was swarming with law enforcement, or whether any family members were alive. Their lack of concern, set against yellow crime scene tape, patrol cars, and a mobile command center, struck investigators as deeply abnormal. Suspecting the pair was withholding information, detectives separated Michelle and Joseph for questioning. Both claimed that on Christmas Eve they had planned to drive to Las Vegas to get married, but became lost and decided to return home. They initially said they had visited Wayne and Judy that morning to share the happy news and that their parents had been pleased. The story quickly unraveled. Under further questioning, Michelle and Joseph admitted the account was a lie they had agreed upon in advance. Michelle's composure collapsed. In a sudden outburst, she cried, "What the hell have I done? I'm a monster." After waiving their constitutional rights, both gave lengthy confessions, admitting to the murders of 6 family members. Michelle later led detectives to the location where one of the firearms used in the killings had been discarded. During her interrogation, Michelle revealed that much of her anger had been directed at her brother, Scott. She said their once close relationship had deteriorated after his marriage to Erica. Michelle claimed Scott owed her approximately $40,000 from multiple loans she said she had given him over the years. She also expressed resentment toward her parents, accusing them of siding with Scott and refusing to support her claims. Further fueling her anger was Wayne and Judy's recent demand that Michelle and Joseph begin paying rent for the trailer and land they had been living on rent-free for more than a year. When detectives asked why she chose to kill her entire family, Michelle gave a chilling answer. She said she was tired of being stepped on and had decided that if her grievances were not resolved by December 24th, she would eliminate them all. When questioned about the murders of Erica and the children, Michelle stated she did not want them living with the memory of what had happened and did not want any witnesses. Joseph later told investigators that he was the one who killed Olivia and Nathan, explaining that Michelle had instructed him to do so because she could not bring herself to kill the children herself. Both repeated the claim that they did not want the children to grow up with the trauma of witnessing their parents' deaths. On December 28, 2007, the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office formally charged Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe with 6 counts each of aggravated first-degree murder with a firearm. Despite their confessions, the legal proceedings moved slowly and at great expense. 10 months later, in October 2008, prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty, citing the scale of the crime, the murders spanning 3 generations, and the killing of 2 young children. That effort ultimately failed. A judge ruled against pursuing capital punishment, and the Washington governor later declared that no executions would occur during his term. Around that same period, Michelle publicly stated that she wished to be executed, calling it the hardest decision she had ever made, but one she believed was necessary to take responsibility for her actions. Years later, on September 5, 2013, the Washington State Supreme Court overturned an earlier ruling, restoring the possibility of capital punishment. The renewed threat of execution appeared to change Michelle Anderson's position. She withdrew her previous statements, assembled a new legal team, and adopted a different strategy. Ultimately, Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe were tried separately, nearly 7.5 years after the Christmas Eve murders. Joseph McEnroe's trial began in January 2015. His defense portrayed him as a man manipulated and coerced by Michelle, arguing that the desire to kill her family had originated entirely with her. According to the defense, Joseph was merely the instrument through which her plan was carried out. Jurors heard a recorded interview in which Michelle told a King County sheriff's detective that the murders had been her idea from the beginning. On the tape, she admitted she had pushed Joseph into participating, accepted responsibility, and said she should have walked away. Joseph's attorneys described him as Michelle's attack dog, claiming she had methodically shaped and controlled him until he complied. They argued that his mental health struggles and emotional instability made him particularly susceptible to her influence. Joseph's background was examined closely in court. His aunt, Mary Turner, testified about a chaotic childhood marked by instability and abuse. She described a mother who was financially desperate and emotionally volatile, alleging that Joseph had been beaten, verbally abused, and used as leverage in attempts to extract money from relatives. When Joseph testified in his own defense, he claimed that killing Olivia and Nathan Anderson was, in his mind, an act of mercy. Ending their lives, he said, was the only way to free them. He described their deaths as quick and painless, a statement that visibly shook the courtroom. On March 25, 2015, after weeks of testimony, the jury found Joseph McEnroe guilty on all 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, along with firearm enhancements. Throughout the trial, his demeanor struck many as unusual. He appeared heavily medicated, frequently pausing, sighing, or struggling to speak, sometimes seeming on the verge of tears. He told the court that the murders haunted him daily. Prosecutors, however, accused Joseph of deliberately altering his behavior to elicit sympathy, even changing his speech and appearance for effect. Despite this, Joseph expressed remorse, telling the court that he had taken the lives of people who had shown him kindness, and that he would undo the killings if it were possible. During the penalty phase, prosecutors urged jurors to impose the death sentence, arguing it was justified by the scale and brutality of the crimes. But the jury could not reach a unanimous decision. 8 jurors voted for execution, while 4 opposed it. Under Washington law, the lack of unanimity required the court to impose life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Joseph McEnroe was formally sentenced on May 13, 2015. 8 years after the murders, Michelle Anderson finally stood trial. Proceedings began in January 2016, but prosecutors removed the death penalty as a sentencing option. They explained that recent capital cases, including McEnroe's, had resulted in life sentences, and pursuing execution against Michelle was no longer in the interest of justice. As an equally culpable defendant, she faced the same punishment, life without parole. Throughout the trial, Michelle's demeanor shifted. At times, she sat with her head lowered, appearing emotional, but she declined to address the court. Her defense attorney claimed she was deeply remorseful and had apologized to those affected. Prosecutors strongly disagreed, describing her motive as pure greed. They noted that during her first police interview, Michelle mentioned money more than 35 times while explaining her actions. Jurors heard recordings in which Michelle contradicted herself repeatedly, at times calling herself a monster, then claiming years of abuse by her parents and brother. No credible evidence was ever presented to support those allegations. Those who knew Wayne, Judy, and Scott described them as compassionate and loving. Erica and her children were entirely innocent. Testimony also revealed Michelle's resentment toward Erica, whom she blamed for damaging her relationship with Scott. Michelle's defense team called no witnesses, citing years of difficulty working with her and her refusal to cooperate. The courtroom instead heard from grieving family members. Erica's mother spoke directly to Michelle, reminding her that even after being shot, Erica had called 911, not just to save herself, but to try to save her children. Michelle's sister, Mary Anderson, also addressed the court. Her voice heavy with grief, Erica's mother told Michelle that she would now have the rest of her life in prison to reflect on what she had done. The judge then addressed the courtroom, acknowledging the profound suffering endured not only by the victims' families, but also by friends, first responders, and jurors who had been forced to confront graphic evidence and harrowing testimony. He spoke of the shared burden carried by those who had done nothing wrong, yet would live forever changed by what they had witnessed. As the proceedings drew to a close, Michelle erupted in anger. She shouted at the judge, accused her court-appointed attorneys of lying, and demanded to be released temporarily so she could hire private counsel. The request was denied. She blamed the court, insisting her rights were being violated. On March 4, 2016, Michelle Anderson was convicted on 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. On April 21, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the same sentence imposed on Joseph McEnroe. With both trials concluded, the Anderson family finally saw justice served, though it came 8 years after the murders. The precise motive behind Michelle's actions may never be fully understood, whether driven by greed, jealousy, rage, or some combination of all three. What is certain is that 2 people bound together by a toxic relationship wiped out 3 generations of a family in a single night. Perhaps Michelle could not bear the life her brother had built with Erica, or the closeness of the family she felt excluded from. Joseph's role remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. With no clear personal motive, he still chose to participate and carried out the murders of 2 children. Today, Joseph McEnroe remains incarcerated at Washington State Penitentiary. Michelle Anderson is held at the Washington Correction Center for Women. Neither will ever be released. And while justice was ultimately delivered in a legal sense, the scars left by the Carnation murders will never truly heal. Thank you for listening to Real Crimes. Share your thoughts on the story, like and subscribe to the channel. Until the next episode, stay tuned.